Leahy or Lahy is a name that seems straightforward, but it isn't. In parts of Ireland, the same spelling or pronunciation is used by families who are not related in the slightest, and what sounds like one surname is, in fact, two very old lines, separated and shaped by language, place, and time. So, you might or might not know, and particularly if you're from the Tipperary area, you probably will know that the surname Leahy is sometimes pronounced Lahy. So it'll be spelled Leahy, but it'll be pronounced Lahy. But actually, so the whole point of this episode pretty much is to say that they're actually two separate names. But we'll get on in a minute to one potential reason Leahy is pronounced Lahy in certain parts of Tipperary. We'll get to that in a minute. But first of all, let's tell you what the names mean, because that's also is always very important in this surname series. So you have Leahy, which comes from Olecha or Olicha, meaning of the hero. So this was generally a name given to sons of a certain warrior who did well in a battle, that kind of thing. So they were a heroic or a great person, and it was like their sons and their sons. But it wasn't an inherited rank, it was kind of memorializing a great moment for a warrior. So that's the Leahy side of it. But you have the Lahy side of it then. The completely different surname that is also Lahy comes from O'Flahav, which is of the ruler or lord. Instead of being a signal of, a great warrior in battle, it was a signal of a king or the lord of... They didn't really have princes back in the day in Ireland. So that was the way of doing it, that they were like, oh, you're of the lord or O'Flahav. But the mad thing is, as I was saying, Lahy and Leahey are interchangeably used in certain parts. And one of those parts that I'm particularly familiar with for obvious reasons is Tipperary. But the reason that it is in Tipperary is mad. Basically what happened was the Leahy surname was Cork, Kerry and Tipperary mostly. Whereas the Lahy surname, so O'Flahav, the Leahy is Olecha from now on, and then Lahy, until they overlap, I will be calling Lahy as in O'Flahav. So in Tipperary, the two names overlapped. And basically what happened was, the English came in the 16th century, so the 1500s, and they started writing down the names that hadn't been written down before, because the Irish wouldn't have written much. So the English wrote down what they heard, but because of the pronunciation differences in the dialects of Irish in Ireland, the Irish language, when I say Irish, I mean the Irish language, it sounded to them, in certain areas, Olicha was Olacha, which they turned to Lahy, and then O'Flahav to them was O'Flaha in some places, which they turned to Lahy. So then therefore you had it where they overlapped. But it's funny because again, the overlap really was only in Tipperary. There was a few other kind of small pockets, but mostly Tipperary, because Leahy, as in Olecha, and then O'Flahav only overlapped there. So because of the Munster Irish, as they call it, the Munster Irish dialect, the name became Lahy. So some Leahys were called Lahy, and then O'Flahavs, as in Lahy, were called Lahy. Lahy then became the main name for the O'Flahavs, but they also have Lahif, Lahive, Laffy, and there's a bunch of other small, lesser known ones. But if you're wondering why the mix-up, that was the mix-up. And if you're talking about a mix-up, even within Leahy itself, but the spellings back then, the English language itself didn't really have its own set spellings for certain things, particularly when they were just taking it down by ear. So you got Leahy, Leahy, which is the one that's mostly. You have Lahy, Lahey, Leahey, and Lahy. Lahy and Lahey are the ones that are seen with both O'Flahav and Olecha. And now I keep saying stuff like, let's get into this crazy thing, what's amazing. But this thing is really cool. I did this episode because I thought I knew that Lahy was pronounced Lahy here, Leahy or Lahy, and that there was a Lahy surname that was presumed was different, which it is. But with the mix-up in spellings that I mentioned because of the non-standardization of English, you'll have families where there will be Lahy, as in Lahey, in one generation, and there'll be Leahy in the next, and then you'll have other families who'll be Lahy the whole way along because they came from O'Flahav, which was standardised pretty much as Lahy. And then you'll have different spellings, as I said. Those different spellings that I mentioned earlier, you'll have those different spellings within the same family in regards to, like, the father would be Leahy and then the son's generation would be Lahy or things like that. It's crazy. Censuses are fun to look at just for that. But it's not only in Ireland, because if you go to the Newfoundland records in Canada, including a man called Patrick, aka Captain Leahy, there is spelling shifts in Newfoundland itself right up to the present day, where you have the four main ones are Lahy, Lahey, Lahey, and Lahy. Not a lot of the O'Flahav Leahys went there, just the Leahys, the Olisha. There is one sort of rule, and that is that the Olisha and the O'Flahav, as you would expect, are Irish names and are mostly Catholic names. However, there is a family or a group of families that came from one root in Cavan, County Cavan. So up kind of the northern part of the country, but not Northern Ireland, that are Leahys, but are predominantly Protestant. The reason this is because they were what they called Huguenots. They were French in origin, and they came from the surname Leahy. So Leahy became Leahy, Lahey, Leahey. And they were escaped Calvinists or Presbyterians from France after the persecution of the Calvinists in France. They escaped to England and then were brought over from England in the Ulster plantation and were given lands in Cavan. And that's how you get the Leahys, who are actually French, which is a mad story. I can go into that more if you want. If you want to comment on my Instagram or this, if you can comment on this where you're listening. But yeah, it's mad that when you look at the Leahy route down in kind of Munster, South Leinster area, and then you go up to a completely different route up in one small area of Cavan. It's crazy. Ireland is just crazy, lads. It's so cool. I kind of give you a brief little taster of migration, but there was also the Peter Robinson expedition, which is one of the first expeditions to go to Canada, had a man called Michael Leahy, who moved from Mitchelstown, County Cork, to Ontario. He's one of the first mentions of the Leahy surnames, or a surname similar to Leahy, in Canada, and he moved to, as I said, Ontario. And that was in 1820s, so that's before the famine. You generally hear of people moving because of the famine, but you never really hear too much about people moving before the famine. But he was one of those people who moved even before the famine made it a necessity. It's just the same thing over and over again, where after the famine they moved to the US and Australia, and some even moved to South Africa, including a record of a man called James Leahy, which is another spelling, Lehy. He was a Leahy, and he moved from Cashel, County Tipperary, all the way to the Cape Colony, which became Cape Town, in around the year 1850. So you have people in Canada, you have people in US, you have people in Australia, and you have people down the very bottom of Cape Colony, South Africa. Leahys are everywhere. But let's bring it back. Two last people that I will mention. One of them is the Archbishop of Cashel and Emily, Archbishop Patrick Leahy, who actually built the Cathedral of the Assumption in Thurles, or more oversaw the construction of the cathedral, where he basically gave builders the mission of, you should build this. So that's actually the cathedral that is currently standing in Thurles today. He was almost forgotten about in Thurles, and he probably, to be honest, still is a bit. But then his head disappeared off a statue about 2-3 years ago. Was in the news for a couple of weeks after that, because, you know, heads on statues don't generally disappear, and this one did. And they couldn't figure it out. It almost Jack the Ripper-esque, where it just disappeared. And my final whistle-stop tour of fellas named Leahy is the guy who shot the first shots in the Irish Civil War. The IRA commander, James Leahy of Thurles again. So, as I said, Tipperary is a stronghold for the Leahy surname. He could have been pronounced Lahy. So could Archbishop Patrick. There's a note in case you forgot. But he shot the first shots in the Salahead Beg ambush of January 1919, which, for those of you who don't know, was on the very same day that the Dáil sat. So the Dáil is Ireland's parliament. For those of you, if you are listening abroad and don't know, the Dáil is Ireland's parliament, and the first time they ever sat was in January 1919, and on the very same day, in Salahead Beg, County Tipperary, an ambush of RIC officers took place, and one of the commanders of that ambush by the IRA was James Leahy from Thurles. So I like a bit of a family crest, and essentially this family crest is amazing because you have lion for courage. Obviously lions are always known as courageous, and so you have a lion front and centre of the coat of arms of the Leahys on a red background, a really, really strong, striking background. If you follow me on Instagram, you'll see I'm going to put up this family crest as the kind of promo. It's so cool. And then they have gold arrows on it, and the line is in gold as well. So obviously the arrows signify, strength and strength in battle, because Leahy is Leahy, which is warrior. I really probably should do the Lahy surname as a crest as well. Might do that as a separate one. But however, it's so cool as well because it's the really striking red and then the really striking gold, obviously signifying, nobility and generosity. So yeah, I do, just thinking back in it now, I do feel a little bit sad or unfair that I've kind of said, oh yeah, Lahy is pronounced similar, and that's kind of it. So I might do another episode on Lahy itself, in the future, because I'm not going to drag the rear end out of the whole surname series. I might do maybe one more episode, because I've a few ideas for the new year. So this might be in the future if I do a separate one. But if you want that, let me know by contacting me on Instagram at Liam Blake Podcaster, or commenting if you can comment on wherever you're listening. But it brings me back to the point that it's nuts to me that because of basically geographical overlap, Leahy and Lahy, or Leahy and O'Flahav, were two surnames that basically overlapped. A hero and a ruler just overlapping and diverging and overlapping again and diverging again, which is insane. So when you hear the name Leahy, you're not just hearing one past, you're hearing a collision of meanings shaped by language, power, faith and chance. A reminder that in Ireland, even the most familiar names still carry unfinished stories waiting to be spoken aloud, like I've just done.